Me on another Let's Talk with the Doc. I'm excited to be here another Wednesday to share another story with you because as I say time and again, stories are inspirational and they are fascinating. And I'm excited tonight to have with me Nichole Henson, who is willing to share at least some of her story with you. And I'm sure that her story will also be inspirational as you listen. So when I come back, I'm going to be talking to Nichole Henson. ORB Ministry presents Let's Talk with the Doc. Grace Without Borders podcast. A thought for you. Ask Pastor. And a whole lot more. You never know what's next or who will join the conversation. All right, my friends. Indeed, you never know what's next or who will join the conversation. And here we have Nichole Henson joining the conversation to share her story. Nichole, welcome to Let's Talk with the Doc. Great to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite.
All right, all right. We are open to hear the story of all those who want to share their story, and so you're welcome to share yours. Normally, I like to find out from my guests. If it's a storytelling, we want to say, "Oh, tell us about your story. Where did your story begin? Where was Nichole born? What was the environment she was born in? Family dynamics as she grew up and discovered herself." What was her inner circle look like as she began to make her own discovery?
Well, I was born in the Midwest in a really small town. My parents were very young when they got married, and they had me soon after. They'd only been married a little bit, and my mom got pregnant and had me. I was born into a domestic violence situation. My biological dad was super violent, and my mom only stayed with him until I was around 3. When I was around 3 years old, she left him because of the violence. She couldn't take it anymore. And she went home to her family, and he had moved to Florida with his family. And so he was granted supervised visitation, not, I'm sorry, unsupervised visitation with me every summer and every other Christmas. And so that's kind of how my life started out, always being afraid of him. I was born knowing to tiptoe around him. He was not the type of person that had kind sides and then violent sides. I just always remember him being very angry and selfish, and we had to tiptoe around him. When I was around 7, he got remarried, and that marriage was very different. As soon as I visited that summer, I knew that that life looked really, really different. They had gotten into witchcraft, they'd gotten into the
Oh,
occult, they'd gotten into some Satanism, and my mind, I was 7 years old. I did not know how to even wrap my mind around the things that they were saying and practicing and doing. I can remember him sitting at the kitchen table, and he would make crystals. He would make them to hang on his body like jewelry because he said he got his power from them. In my little mind, I had no idea what that meant. I hadn't grown up around those things. The rest of my family was Christian. I'd been in church from the time I was born with my grandparents. And so it was a very, very scary time. So not only was I afraid of him physically, then I thought, oh my goodness, he has all this magical power and he can do whatever he wants to do. And he seems so huge in my life. And that's also when I really remember the sexual abuse starting.
I'm a little curious. I'm a little curious. I'm going to get to that because I'm going to get to that part of it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Okay, so you say your parents, they were very young. They got married young, and soon after you're born. So that means you're only the only child from your mother and your father.
Yes.
Okay. What has your mother ever told you what 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 led to the relationship, and cause what brought them to get married at this young age? What was the fascination or the interest? Has she ever shared that with you, and then or a disappointment in how what she projected it would have been, it didn't turn out to be?
Well, in our family, it wasn't unusual to get married young. All of the women got married young, so that wasn't that unusual. He
Hmm.
was actually, so her mom and dad went to church, and he was the son of a preacher. And so in her mind, she thought, oh,
Interesting.
okay, that they met that way because everybody was in church together. I don't think he ever professed Christianity or being a follower of God or anything, but she definitely did not know how abusive he was. She knew he was spoiled, like that was pretty obvious. His parents spoiled him. She did know that, but she had no idea how violent he would be. And so I think for her, that was a very big eye opener. She also grew up in a home, she wasn't a Christian either. And she grew up in a home where her parents were, and her mom was very, very controlling. Her mom didn't let her go
Mm.
do anything at school. She wasn't allowed to go to to the football games, the basketball games. She wasn't allowed to go spend the night at friends. So I think she wanted out. She wanted
So,
out
so
from
that
being.
that was kind of a strict church culture, that we don't do some of these things because they're worldly. Was that the?
That's part of it. And another part, my grandma was just very controlling. My
Okay.
grandma didn't want anything to happen to her. She had had a son who passed away at a young age. And I think that changed her a lot. And she became very, very controlling.
Mm.
She would like sneak on my mom's phone calls. Back in the day, you had the landline. Well, my mom would
Yeah.
be on the phone and my grandma would be trying to listen in. And she just was very, very controlling. I don't think it came from a bad place of, I just want you to miss out on life. I think it come from a place of I'm going to protect you and nothing's going to happen to you.
And that was my thinking. Was it controlling or overprotective?
Overprotective. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Very
I
much
could I could
over.
see that, especially losing a child in the early place, and you have another young child, then you want to do everything to kind of build a fence around that child. So I might, in my own little mind, I might think she was overprotective, want to make sure she knows every step and every move and whatever is coming in and going out. So I could see that from the fear standpoint.
Definitely. And my mom was very rebellious in that she didn't want control. She didn't want to be told what to do. So they clashed a lot. Like they really butted heads a lot. So I think
And I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I'm just gonna to put this into perspective in the conversation. Normally, from the child standpoint, they think it is control because they're not being allowed to do what they want to do. From the parent standpoint, parenting, I am trying to protect you. So they have complete two different perception on what this is, right?
and
Two
it
different
caused
perception.
this.
And so that caused the clash. One is protective and one thing is control. So there goes.
Yeah. And so I think when it presented an opportunity to get on her out on her own, I think it looked like a really good idea. I don't know that they dated very long before they got married. I don't know that they even spent a lot of alone time together
Hmm.
before they got married. So I don't know if she knew him really well. That part I'm not sure about, but she knew his family. His family was known in the church circle. And so I think for her, it seemed like it would be a good choice.
Hmm.
I know that she spent a lot of time in fear as soon as they got married because he was very violent. There was one time he threw a huge one of those huge light flash or flashlights that are the metal ones, and it just barely missed her head and it went straight through the wall.
Wow.
And so, I mean, he was super, super violent, and anything could trigger him. There was one time their dog got out, and he went out and was trying to get it back in, and it wouldn't come to him, but it came to her. And he went ballistic because the
Wow.
dog had come to her and not him.
Wow.
And so I just think that she stayed as long as she absolutely could. They also had moved away to Florida because his family was there. And so she did not have her family there. She
Hmm.
was with his mom and dad and him. And they babied him. They excused everything he did. They tried to clean up every mess he ever made. He wouldn't work, so they were helping support them. And I just think she felt very isolated.
Did they have more children, or he's the only child?
Nope, they had two older kids. They had
Two
two
older
older
kids.
daughters.
So he
They
was
were
the
not treated.
he was the last child.
Yes, and the
Okay,
only boy.
and the only boy.
Hmm.
Mm. So
And
he
he
felt
almost died.
privileged. He felt privileged, or they treated him as privileged.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, I
all right.
mean, they even cooked him different meals than his daughter, than the daughter.
Really?
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. He
Wow,
definitely. It wasn't just a perception in the family that he was treated different. He was definitely treated different. Um,
interesting.
yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic to look back on now and try to figure out. And I honestly can't. You know.
Okay, all right. So let's get back to your 7 years old now. I just wanted to get a little bit of the more of the beginning. So you're back at 7. You're down in Florida. You're spending this time with your biological father. You find yourself in a strange atmosphere, um, some religious thing or some occultic behaviors or whatever it was. Now let's get back to where you were with that experience.
And that was when I was 7, and that's when I really remember the sexual abuse starting. He would abuse me and my step siblings. I had two step sisters and a step brother. He physically abused the step brother, but he sexually abused my step siblings, my step sisters. And he also would tell me that he could read my mind. I think that to me was probably more damaging than any abuse that I went through in my entire life,
Wow.
because that created no safe space. When I
Hmm.
was in Indiana with my fam, like my mom and her parents, I still didn't feel safe. I felt like he could read my mind, and I thought he could because of the things I'd seen him do. There was some animal sacrifices and just all of the darkness that he was in. I had no doubt he could read my mind. And he always told me if I told anything about the abuse, he would kill me and my mom. He also told me that I wasn't allowed to think bad thoughts about him. So I can
Wow.
remember laying in bed at night, just chanting over and over, don't think bad, don't think bad, don't think bad. And because of that, fear was a constant companion of mine. I
Wow.
never felt safe wherever I was at. I was anxious. I was a very anxious and sickly child. I had a lot of headaches, stomach aches, vomiting. I would go back and forth to the doctor. I had a lot of allergies and I missed a ton of school. I was never happy. I was always sad. I was always just anxious and irritable. It was a very difficult childhood because I just never felt safe.
So let me ask you. So even when you go back home to your mom
Mhm.
from Florida, you said that was in Indiana.
Yes.
So even you leave time spent with your father and get back home with your mom, you're still traumatized by the experience, and you're still believing in your mind that even when you're absent, that he can still read your mind. So therefore, you can't say some things that you would want to say to your mother because you think that he's gonna know that you say it.
Hmm.
And
I
then
thought he,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought he would even know if I thought it. So I couldn't even think it. Like I couldn't
Wow,
even think bad thoughts about him.
wow, wow. Listen, these are the reasons why we talk to people about their stories, because everybody's story is so unique and so different. And I've never even heard something like that before, that a child could be so influenced, traumatized, um, fearful, that they are unable to take a thought about an evil experience, because if you did that, it would work. It would end up being worse for you than if you think about it. That if you didn't think about it, I can't fathom that. I really can't fathom that. And especially to do that to your own child. Now, you said that you were always tiptoeing around him in the early, your mom tiptoeing around him, um, but he has the right of visitation, so you could go and come. I'm contemplating. Well, I don't know the question to ask, because if you can share with your mom, then hadn't she asked you anything? And I am sure she asked you, Nichole, what was it like when you were in Florida? How do you respond to the curiosity of your mom, and I imagine looking at you that she's seeing something at you from observation, that there is something that you're not disclosing. How did you and your mom deal with those moments when she feel there is something you're not saying and you don't want to say it for the reason that you have already said?
I because I think of being born into domestic violence, I was never I mean, I was always a nervous kid. I was always anxious. I was always just didn't feel good from the get-go. So that part wasn't really new. I think that they could tell something was wrong with me, but they thought it was because I was having to be away from my mom for so long. So when I got back home, it wasn't, oh, there's something wrong with her because something bad happened there. It
Mm.
was she was traumatized because she had to be gone so long. And they would ask me, and I would say, it was great. We had fun. I played outside. I played with my stepsisters and brother. It was a great time. I would
Wow.
have never once said, "Oh, I'm scared. I don't want to go." I would have never even been able to say, "I don't want to go." I may have cried because I couldn't hide that part, but they thought it was just because I was going to miss them. When I was younger, we lived with my grandparents, so I got to grow up with my grandma and grandpa, and because my mom was a single woman, single mom. And so they thought that it was just me missing them, is what they always thought. Now, when I
Wow.
hit teenage years, I was absolutely out of control, and they knew something was wrong then, but they didn't know what.
What an interpretation. One making himself or herself comfortable that the reason you are having this attitude, are not responding or behaving the manner which they think a normal child would do, is because they conclude that is because you are missing them to go to Florida, and
Mhm.
they have no clue that is because you have been traumatized, scared, threatened, fearful of being there, and you can't say anything. So, as a result of that, nobody is dealing with what is affecting you. And so, I'm thinking now of the combustion chamber in Nichole's mind, heart, and emotions want to explode, and it's not happening. how how are you able, how are you able to hold that there and here, and not explode?
You know, my emotions, you can just imagine where my emotions were. I shut down when I was younger. I just completely, I feel like shut down. We always joked that I was born an old soul. Like I wasn't the laughing, giggly, happy-go-lucky kid. And we just always chalked it up to I spent a lot of time with my elders, and so but it was really none of those things. It was more that I could not release
Mm.
myself. I couldn't
Wow.
just be comfortable in my own skin because I have someone monitoring my thoughts. Like my whole life, I have someone monitoring everything I'm thinking is what I thought. I didn't, of
Wow.
course, but that's what I thought.
Wow.
So there wasn't that release. It was very controlled. And I think that's why I was sick all the time, because you can't control all that and you can't stuff it and you
Mm.
can't hide it. When I was 12, everything fell apart and blew up.
Mm.
And my biological dad attempted suicide. He tried to
Oh,
kill himself and he
really?
didn't die. He shot himself, but he shot
Oh,
himself here and it didn't kill him.
hold
It
a
really
second.
didn't
So,
even do much.
okay, so we're gonna get back to that.
Okay.
What what do you think, even from now reflecting,
Hmm.
what do you think brought him to that point? Was it that he was now facing up to his own reality? Was he now disappointed of how he treated his child? What do you think triggered that? Was something going wrong someplace else? When Nichole can see brought him to that point of attempting suicide?
As far as I know, he was never remorseful for anything he did. What was going on in his life at the time was a few things. One, he was dating a woman that had just broke up with him. So
Mm.
we kind of think he was doing it either because he had lost her and he wanted to get back at her, or he did it trying to get her attention. He also, the very interesting thing was, is he lived with his parents at the time. Well, he always lived with his parents. If he wasn't married, he lived with his mom and dad, and he wasn't married at the time. And he also, in the gun, and I don't know what kind of gun it was. I don't even know what it looked like, but it had 3 bullets, and there was 3 people in the house, and it could have held a lot more bullets, but that was only amount he had. So we actually think he was going to kill his mom and dad and then himself, but for whatever reason he didn't. But he was very, very angry. There was absolutely zero remorse, like none. So we don't think it was anything to do with that. We think it had more to do with the woman, because he wanted to make sure she knew what had happened and that she knew what was going on. He wanted her to visit him at the hospital, and she, of course, ran the opposite direction.
Do you know what trend his life took? It just that the lady left him, or what do you know what soured the relationship that caused the rift between them?
I really don't, but looking at his pattern, because I have connected with some of the women that he had dated in the past, and I just think he was very, very selfish in every relationship, and very overbearing, and I guess if we put a label to it, we would say narcissistic, and everything had to be about him. And I think she just got tired of it. Like, she just couldn't
Hmm.
do it. They
Hmm.
hadn't been together really long, but she had children, and I'm sure that was appealing to him. And so he wasn't allowed around her kids anymore. Something could have happened. He could have got caught being inappropriate with one of her kids. I don't know. I'm really not sure.
Because you said that the abuse were with those kids and along with yourself.
This was a different woman,
That
but
was a different one.
yes, this was he dated he did not like to be alone. So as soon as he would divorce one or one would leave him, he was in a new relationship. So this was a different relationship, but the one that he was married to when I was in Florida, yes, he abused them.
Okay.
I, I actually have a half sister by one of them.
Mm, okay. Okay. So this was he still in Florida at this time? His parents was in Florida, or they were in someplace else when
They
he.
had when I was around 9. They were originally from Indiana. Both sides of my family were from Indiana and Ohio. So my grandparents, his mom and dad, had moved back to Indiana, and they had a daughter that lived there. So they moved out by her. And then when I was at around 9, he came back to Indiana with just the clothes on his back. We didn't know why. He was still
Mm,
married to that woman. He left the state like he was scared to death, and he showed up with just the clothes on his back, and he moved
mm.
to Indiana with absolutely no belongings. I found out later, many, many, many years later, what happened. But at the time, I had no idea why he left her, why he didn't bring any of his stuff, and what was going on. But he came back scared. So by the time I was 12, he had been in Indiana for a few years.
Okay. Okay. All right. Oh my God, this is an interesting story and a complicated one, and and a very complicated one. And unfortunately, as we go along, we'll see if you were able to get over some of these trauma. We know that sometimes people don't get beyond those experiences unless they get an opportunity to really deal with it, face
Yep.
up with it, talk about it, get some relief of it. Okay, so now you're 12. You said things get took a downhill turn, and then we don't want to miss his own attempt on his own life. So see how you can unpack that. So help us to understand those
So
moments.
when he shot himself, the police said, so what happened? He shot himself under here. It traveled through his tongue. It got into his sinus cavity and traveled up and stopped at, it embedded in his skull, but it didn't touch his brain. It just kind of
Wow.
embedded in there inside. It wasn't outside, it was inside.
Hmm.
The police said that because of the age of the bullets, they just weren't that powerful. If they were more powerful, it would have done more damage. But because they were so old, is why they think that it didn't do more
Hmm.
damage.
Hmm.
So he was taken to the hospital. Um, I was told by his family, like they called me and told me, when they told me that he had shot himself, my whole world fell apart, because I knew that if he could hurt himself, he was his most important person in his world. There was
Hmm.
nobody to him more important
Hmm.
than him.
Hmm.
I knew if he could hurt him, that he definitely could kill me. And
Hmm.
he could kill
Hmm.
me easily, and he could kill my mom easily. And so, because of that, I had had some repressed memories. It wasn't like I never got to the point where I didn't know he had abused me. It was never that. But I had pushed it down so far because I wasn't allowed to think about it. And at that point, I didn't really still believe that he could read my mind, but I knew that he could kill me. I
Right.
knew that without a shadow of a doubt, he could kill me and he could kill my mom. And
Hmm.
because of that, I went into like a deep depression. I started thinking about suicide when I was around 12. That was the first time I had an actual plan that came to me and I thought about it. I couldn't sleep at night. I would be up all night long because of fear. I um, I went into therapy for the first time because my mom could tell that something was really, really wrong with me. What she would tell me, like looking back now, is that I was very erratic. My moods were very, very erratic. I would go into blackout rages where I would scream and yell. Sometimes I would claw my face. I would pull my hair out. I would hit my head on the wall. I
Wow.
started cutting. They thought maybe my mom and stepdad thought maybe I'd gotten into drugs. They didn't know what was wrong, but they knew something was definitely wrong. Something was not okay. And so, I had also, by the time I was 13, and I went straight from being interested in boys to being interested in men. I started having a lot of sexual relationships with older, like men in their mid to late 20s. I really lost control for a long time. And I was definitely always felt like I wanted to die. I never wanted to live. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, didn't know who I was, lacked identity.
So were you? I'm just assuming trying to get this relationship with older men. Were you trying to find love and affection, care of adults? Because the bigger the older men would appear to be somewhat more like of a fatherhood, a father figure. Was it trying to find some of what you miss from the father, from your dad, a relationship, a cuddling father daughter friendly loving relationship, while you were just like searching for it around and not finding it?
Maybe it could have been, but I also didn't fit in with people my age. I never fit in with kids. I never fit in with teenagers. I had very few friends my age. I fit in with adults because I just felt I just wasn't like kids my age, the stuff they talked about, the things they cared about. I never cared about that kind of stuff. I never talked about it. I mean, I had some friends that I played with, of course, when I was
Hmm.
younger,
Hmm.
but I would have rather been sitting inside reading a book or watching soap operas than outside playing with kids. I just was like a older person from the time I was younger. But looking back, was I trying to fill a void? I'm sure I was. And I mean, I used my body. I didn't care anything about it. It meant absolutely nothing to me. I thought that sex was what you did to get somebody's attention. If you didn't
Hmm.
do that, then you wasn't going to get their attention and they wouldn't care about you. And I fully thought that I was in relationships, but looking back now, I know that was absolutely not a relationship. It wasn't appropriate. They should have never even looked my direction when they knew my age.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Was there not no law against that, and stuff like
Oh,
that?
yeah, there
Wow.
was, but nobody ever got caught. Nobody ever. And I didn't look at it that way at all. I looked at it as, oh, I'm in a relationship. I felt special. I felt special that I was 14 and a 24, 25-year-old liked me. I thought,
Wow.
wow, I thought that it meant that I was special, that I was
Hmm.
mature,
I
that there
get you.
was
I could see
something.
that. I could see that. I could definitely see that. Wow.
And that did not, I never got well, I put myself in a lot of really dangerous situations, but thank God nothing bad, nothing, I don't know what word, bad isn't the right word because I should not have been having sexual relationships, but I never got physically hurt where I could have. I had myself in situations, I could have been kidnapped, I could have been raped, I could have had all kinds of stuff happen to me, but thank God that didn't happen. Um, so I continued that way until I
How
was
how
about,
how was your mom dealing with this at a breakout teenager? I mean, what I imagine what she feared
mm,
is now becoming a reality. Where was she? What was her counselor? How was she dealing with it? Was she traumatized by your own experiences? How was she handling the erratic behavior of her? Is that only daughter?
she had another son with my stepdad
Okay.
when I was 12.
Okay, so that was a baby. You're 13, a baby. That's a baby.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So how is she dealing with that?
I think for her, and I don't want to speak for her, but we have had a lot of conversations about this. When she married my stepdad, he was everything that she'd never had in a man. He was a good man. They started going to church together, and she had the life that she'd always wanted. And then she has this new baby, and that was what she always wanted, was a safe, stable home. And so she
Hmm.
was able to do everything with him and for him that she wasn't able to do with me. And for her, it felt like a second chance in life. But then there I was.
There you were. Exactly.
And so for me, it felt like she had her perfect life and I didn't fit into it. And I
Mm.
was on the outside looking in. Like I was never part, and it wasn't what they did, it's what I felt internally. I was
Hmm.
never part of that family. But because I was so erratic, she was very protective of my brother. And
Hmm.
not just because I was erratic, because of the things that I had went through, she became super protective of my brother, afraid of anything happening to him. And so for her, it was easier to just let me be out of the house if I wanted to be. I spent a lot of time at my biological dad's sister's house, my aunt. I spent a lot of time over there. And it was easier for my mom to just let me go whenever I wanted
Hmm.
to go. She
Hmm.
didn't make me stay home. If I wanted to go to a friend's house, she let me go because they didn't know what to do with me. I was in counseling, but look, this part's crazy to me. So the therapist never had family sessions. She never told my parents anything to do to help me, any way to connect with me. She didn't give them any information at all. And so I would just go, and then my parents still had no clue what to do with me. So they did not have any help. They didn't know what to do. So they let me pretty much go if I wanted to go. And I wasn't allowed to like be out all night and those types of things, but I was allowed to go to my aunt's whenever I wanted. So I spent a lot of time out of her house as a
What,
teenager.
what was the use of the therapies? What was it? What was the purpose? Did I? What did I have here?
You know,
Is that
looking,
is that my phone talking or yours?
mine's not.
I'm not sure. Something. One second. I'm not sure what pops up on
Okay.
my phone. My. I'm sorry on that. I'm not sure what's going on my phone.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm sorry about that. I am so sorry about that. Something was playing behind the scene. My apologies on that. My apologies on that. Sorry about that. Let's
It's
get back
okay.
to where we were.
You know, looking back,
So my
that
question
therapist.
was. So my question was. I saw my apology. That my question was. What was then the use of a therapist just dealing with a 13-year-old isolated therapy, not having anything with the parent to tell the parent what the discoveries are, how to deal with, what to do, not to do, how to help the child to cope. I mean, what was the sense of the therapist if that wasn't happening?
I really I couldn't tell you because looking back, it was a waste of money and a waste of time because she should have involved my parents. I can't really even remember. I remember I used to be allowed to smoke in her office, so I would go and smoke while we talked. I mean, it was a nice
You
break
were
from
allowed to smoke in her office.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I would say it would be a nice break from school. I would get to go to sit in her office and we'd talk, and I'd get to smoke. So at the time, I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. Looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness. I did just finally disclose the abuse to her. And she sent a letter to my biological dad and told him because I was still having visitation up until this point. And visitation was very loose. I went over there whenever I wanted, was basically how. Once he moved back to Indiana, it wasn't, he got all summer. It wasn't none of that. It was just super loose. I went and visited because they live in the same town. So if I wanted to go over, I went over whenever. And I always did go over because in my mind, nobody could know that anything was wrong. And if I stopped visiting him, everybody would know there was a reason. So I
Hmm.
still went and seen him. He lived with his mom and dad, and they lived on the same property as my aunt. So most of the time, I would go to my aunt's house and then just pop in and see my biological dad for a little bit.
So
So
that
whenever
that is after he recovered the attempted. Okay. How did he look? And have you ever had a conversation with him about anything? Did he ever say anything? Did he ever share a thought with you on what happened?
Mm-mm.
Because
Nothing.
I'm sure they got to be changing in his facial appearance with,
It didn't. You could
it
not even
didn't.
tell it. No, because it was all internal. He had a little
Really
scar right there, and that was it. You couldn't tell. You couldn't see it.
interesting.
At the very first, he had swelling. That was all you could tell was his face was swollen.
Hmm.
But after that, it was a very small bullet, and I
Okay.
mean,
Okay, maybe a little 22 thing where that can be a small little
I
pistol.
think something like that. It was
Yeah,
a handheld
yeah.
something, and it was. They
Hmm.
said it was very small. The first time I seen him, his eyes were swollen because it had went like up by
Behind
one
that,
eye,
right. Hmm.
and they had shaved his head because they did surgery, and that was it. And he would laugh and about his head being shaved, like he made a big joke out of it. And after that, I would spend the night over at their house sometimes, and I would be awake all night long, and I would hold a can of hairspray. And I would lay there all night long thinking, if he comes in my room, I'm going to spray this in his eyes so at least I can get out of the room. Like that's how afraid of him I was. I would
Wow.
visibly shake sometimes when he would walk in. I could feel myself just shaking. I couldn't talk very well because I would just be, I was scared of him. I was
So
super scared.
you went by your own will, or you were required to go? Which one?
I felt required to go, but I went, he would say, I don't know. I can't remember. Like my grandparents may call and say, "Come spend the weekend with us," and I would say, "Okay." There was
So
never,
you were 13, 14 that time, and still went.
yes,
Wow. So were you still having that psychological effect that I'm still required to do this? Were you still fearful that if you didn't do it, it could go wrong?
yes.
So you were still driven by that fear that I have to do this.
It was like the old saying, "Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer." It was kind of like
Hmm.
that because I
Hmm.
always thought, well, if I keep him happy, he won't hurt me.
Get
If
you,
he's not
get you,
mad at me, he
get
has
you,
no reason to hurt
get you,
me.
get you, get you, get you. Wow. Whew. Wow. You must be made out of rock. You must be made out of rock. You are special to have gone through all of those for all those years and survive. Keep on going because we're gonna find out how Nichole survived all of this to be here now, still talking about it. That is exceptional.
So, whenever I disclosed to the therapist, she did send a letter, and she did tell my mom that I had disclosed sexual abuse. Some of these memories get kind of fuzzy here. I need to sit down with my mom and just talk through everything, which we've talked through a lot, but not detail by detail. But when I disclosed the abuse to the therapist, she was a mandated reporter. She should have called the police, but she
Mm-hmm.
didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back now, I have no reason. It baffles me. I don't know why she didn't. She was mandated. But anyway,
That is dereliction of her duty. That's a part
yeah,
of her requirement to do. That's strange. Very strange.
it's very, and she knew I was still having visits with him. The abuse was not continuing. The sexual abuse wasn't continuing, but she knew I was still seeing him, and she knew the psychological effect it was having on me. And yet she didn't say anything, or she didn't report it. But she told my mom, and she sent a letter to my biological dad saying that I needed some space and time with him from him because of some things that I had disclosed, and I needed time to work through that. That absolutely blew up my family.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, so my biological dad's father was the pastor at a church. At that church, my mom's parents and sister and brother-in-law went to that church. So when I disclosed, it caused a big old family combustion
Mm-hmm.
because his parents, my biological dad's parents said they came to my grandpa, who was the pastor, came to my mom's house. I was sitting in the bedroom and I heard them say, "She is young. No matter what he did to her, she can get over that. That is her father, and she needs to have a relationship with him." And my stepdad said, "No, we're going to give her space." Well, my grandpa went off, and so that blew up the church.
Oh wow.
It got very nasty between both sides of my family.
Wow.
And I don't really know how it calmed down, but I do know that I didn't stay gone that long. I decided I'm just going to start visiting again and everything's going to go back to normal and everything will just be calm again. Because when I stayed away from him, I was more afraid of him than if I was visiting him. Because in my mind, if I'm not visiting him, he knows I'm talking, he knows I'm
Hmm.
texting, and that will set him off. At least if I'm visiting him and pretending like he's a great dad,
Wow.
nobody will know and he'll be calm. And if I keep him calm, he won't hurt me. So I started visiting again. Like it was left up to me. I'm not
So
sure
so
that
you so you so so Nicole is carrying the whole weight of the family being together. Not only suffering through the trauma and the emotional roller coaster, but you're still carrying the responsibility of holding everything else together. I mean, because if you didn't visit, you said, then you would think he would think you are talking and you're telling what's happening. So you have to pressure Nicole to go to where she doesn't want to go, just to make things appear to be good, to
yeah,
keep everybody else together. I don't know how you did that. I don't know how you did that, but you must be specially made. You must be specially made. All right, so continue. My friend, I'm talking to Nichole Henson, and this story is traumatic just to hear it now. She's an adult, and just to reflect on the story that she has lived. I don't know how she did it, but this is her story.
it's always interesting to me to see other people's reactions because I lived it. And to me, it was like, oh, people have it so much way worse than me. It wasn't that big of a deal. I think we have a tendency to minimize. And then when I hear it, I'm like, yeah, it was traumatic. It was traumatic. I think for me, I shut down is the only way that I know that I survived. I basically shut down. It wasn't that I had zero emotions, but I just stuffed everything down and I wouldn't think about it. Like I literally would not think about it. And you can only do that for so long before it vomits all over you emotionally. So I continued like that for several years,
So
visiting.
you were just going now like a programmed robot.
Yes.
Just like a programmed robot, you have to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. Just move from here, move from there, do this, do that. That is interesting.
Yeah. I started, so I would count, this probably sounds really odd, but I would count objects constantly, and that would help block out thoughts, that would help block out memories, that would help block out anything. I would just count constantly. So I used to, if I was talking to you, I would be looking around my room, counting everything in my, and that's how I
Mhm.
kept my brain just kind of
Wow.
stuffing everything down. I don't do that anymore. We'll get to that in a bit, but yeah, I think that was one of the things that was like a coping mechanism, was to just push things down. So when I was 16, we're up to around 16, I met this guy that was close to my age. He was 18, and we started dating and hanging out and spending a lot of time together. He did not really like my biological dad's family that much. And so I stopped going over there as much as I had. I would still visit from time to time, but not like I used to. And we decided, why not get married? In my family, again, it wasn't unusual for the women to get married young. It was never on our radar that, oh, we could go to college, we could have a career. It was you got married and you had kids and you had a family and you became a mom. Like that was
Hmm.
just what we did.
Hmm.
And so when I started dating him, to everybody around me, it looked like I calmed down a lot. I was happier. I was more stable. And so my mom and stepdad agreed. They let me get married. My mom had to sign for me. And I got married. And within, I think, 6 months, we moved out and got our own place. And the domestic violence started as soon as we moved.
Oops. Oh
Yeah.
wow.
I made a big oops, big oops. I
Wow.
did not know him very well before we got married, but I was super toxic in relationships. I was very codependent, and if someone even looked my way, I had to have them. Like I couldn't breathe without him. I couldn't live without him. I romanticized every relationship. And so I never considered telling. It was never, you know, people say, why did you stay? I stayed in the marriage for 6 years. And people say, why? Well, a little bit over six. Why did you never tell? It was never on my radar to tell. You got to remember, I'd spent a lifetime of covering up abuse. I was programmed by my biological dad. You don't tell. When someone you love hurts you, you cover it up for them and you put a smile on your face and you say everything is amazing. So why would I not have done that in this marriage? And that's exactly what I did. I never told anybody. I covered it up. I hid it. And I'm not saying it was all him. I was very toxic in the relationship. I was very broken. I was very mentally damaged. But that never excuses a man to put his hands on a woman at all.
It's hard not to be mentally damaged at that point. I mean, it's really hard not to be, but you're superhuman, I could say, maybe.
It didn't feel like it. It felt super damaged, is what I felt. I felt super, super damaged.
Right.
And the depression was really bad. I had very severe depression, drastic mood swings, PTSD, and then that marriage added PTSD onto it. But one of the great things, two of the great things that came out of that marriage is I had my son, which is amazing. I wanted to be a mom. I loved him. Was not a good parent just because I did not have a lot of emotional capacity.
Mm,
Um, I loved him, but I did not have the connectivity that I
mm,
should have had because I just
mm.
didn't have anything in my emotional reservoir. It took everything I had just to live through the day. I didn't have a lot. And I
Wow.
also got saved. So when I was 18, my parents, my mom and stepdad invited us, my husband at the time and I, to go to their church. And we visited and we ended up meeting with the pastor one on one with him. And he walked us through salvation, the plan of salvation. And we prayed, we accepted the Lord, and we got deep in the church really quick. And that was a really good thing. But I stayed in church. He didn't. He only stayed in for a certain amount of time.
Mm.
And then he just walked away from the Lord and he was like, I'm done. I don't want it. It's not for me. And he got worse. I mean, you can
Wow.
imagine living for the
Wow.
Lord, and then he got worse. And so when my son was around 6 years old, the last time that my ex husband physically assaulted me, he put me through a wall. Part of my body, like my hip and back, went through the wall. He threw me into it so hard.
Really?
I was bruised all like it was bad. It was so bad. And I knew we was going to kill one of us was going to kill the other because I was to my breaking point where I wasn't going to take it anymore. And
Wow.
I knew that it was coming to a boiling point. And I saw my son seeing that. And I knew that I was letting him grow up just the same way I had grown up. And I was not going to let my child be in that. And so I had prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And I really felt released from that. And I left and I divorced him. I moved in, my son and I moved in with my parents and I divorced him. And that was in my early 20s. So here I was in my early 20s, divorced, broken with a
Wow.
with a with a child, feeling free kind of for the first time because I had went straight from my mom and stepdad's house to being married with my first husband. So this was the first time in my adult life where I had been pretty much on my own. I mean, I had my son. I wasn't neglectful of him or anything at all like that, but I just mean to be able to think for myself and be able to make decisions for myself. And I started then telling about the abuse. After I was out of it, then I let my family know how bad it was and what all had went on. And of course, they never wanted me to go back at all. And I didn't. I didn't go back. He moved on with his life. I moved on with mine. I got remarried pretty quickly because I was still very toxic and codependent. Could not be alone, never wanted to be alone. I wanted in a relationship. I wanted
Hmm.
a husband. And thankfully, I met a man who was very kind and gentle. The problem was when I went through the domestic violence, something switched in me, and I said, ain't nobody ever going to lay their hands on me. Ain't nobody going to look at me sideways. I've been a doormat my entire life. I'll never be a doormat again. So I came out of that very aggressive and very dominating, very manipulating, very controlling. And then the husband that I married was very passive. And so you can imagine how that went. I ran all over him. I was very
Wow.
cruel.
Wow. Oh,
I
wow.
became the abuser because I was very, not physically, but
Mm-hmm.
emotionally
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
nobody was going to even look at me sideways. And so I flipped the switch. But thankfully, we've been married over 20 plus years.
Good for
And
you.
yeah, it's working really well.
Good for you. Good for you. My friend, I'm talking to Nichole Henson, and her story is one for the ages. I'm gonna give her a moment to get a drink of water. I'm gonna take a little break and come back and to hear the good side of her story, if there is a good side, and how this husband of hers for 20 plus years, I'm imagining that she must have opened up to him and something. So let's, when we come back, we'll find out if she did that. Give her a chance to get a break, a little drink of water.
ORB Ministries presents Truth Matters. Join the Truth Matters panel for discussion on issues of the times with host Dr. Orville Beckford Sr. and his panel consisting of Bishop Ishmael Charles, Reverend Joycelyn Barnett, Minister Ava Samuels, Minister Kevin Johnson, Dr. Danette Ming, Bishop Anthony Campbell, and Pastor Shelley Antoni. Nothing is off limits for discussion. Follow ORB Ministries on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And be ready for the next hot topic on Truth Matters.
This is the book they've been talking about. The seven churches of Asia Minor, or the seven churches in Revelation. If you want to know about the letters that Jesus sent to these churches, you gotta get yourself a copy of this book. Scan the QR code to get an ebook or a paperback, and then you can find out a lot more about these churches and the letters Jesus sent to them. Your story. Everyone has a story. Do you want to tell yours? Stories are inspirational and unique. Maybe God wants to use your story as a life changer for someone. But that will never happen unless you share your story. Not only that it could be a life changer for somebody, but it could change your life as well as you release yourself. Let it go and inspire someone. That will not happen unless you share it. Remember, your light can't shine covered under a bushel. Do you want to share your story? Email orbministries@gmail.com and let's talk with the doc. Only heaven will record the impact you might have and the lives you will change as you share. Maybe that's a ministry God has given you to be a source of inspiration, a testimony of God's goodness and how you made it. Are you ready? Let's do it.
Every Wednesday, 8 p.m., join ORB Ministries on Let's Talk with the Doc, live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. There is a story, something to encourage and inspire you. You may even have a life-changing experience. You never know what's next or who will join the conversation. Stay connected. Subscribe to ORB Ministries YouTube channel. Follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
All right, my friends, thank you again for being patient and joining me with Nichole Henson and this what kind of expression can I give? Unusual, traumatic, dramatic, extraordinary ordinary story that she's been sharing. If you missed it, you got to go back to the beginning and take it from the top so you can get to where we are. All right, so my goodness, let's hear some good side. Let's hear some good things now from the story of Nichole Henson. Now you found another gentleman. You're married to the gentleman, and all hell is breaking loose on him from your side because the combustion chamber broke open, and you found a gentleman. And I'm just putting words in your mouth here. You found a gentleman who is so calm that you can dump it on him. So how did that go? How did that go? That it worked out for 20 plus years? How did he handle it? And how did he deal with the chain? Did he just not respond? Did he say, well, you know, do you find him as an angel sent from God, or a deposit box where you can pour out all that you had piled up in? How did that unfold?
He came into the marriage with his own, and I don't get into his testimony at all because that's his to share, but he came in with his own issues from his past. And because of that, he was super passive. And so whenever I would be exploding, he wouldn't respond like at all. And I would push and I would push and I would push because I think
Mhm.
part of me wanted to see, will he hit me? No
Mm.
matter, he says, no matter what I do and what I say, he ain't going to hit me, but let's see. Let's see if he's really like that. Of course, that was the first few years. After that, I realized, oh no, he's not going to do anything like that. But in our marriage, I also started, not only was I emotionally sick, mentally sick, I started getting physically sick. I started
Mm.
getting all of these diagnoses. Like, I think your body can only take that type of mental baggage for so long and it just starts
Wow.
wearing down.
Wow.
So even in my early 20s, I was on like 15 different medications. I
Oh my
was getting
goodness.
really sick. I had went back to school to be a mental health therapist because I wanted to help people. It was on my heart to help people, but then I could only practice for a couple years because I was still so sick. So
Hmm.
by the time I was in my, I don't know, um, late 30s, that had been our lives. Me very emotionally sick, me a very emotionally abusive, and physically getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And some of the other things that we experienced was just very demonic torment. And we would see things in our house, we would hear things in our house, we would have our things moved, our lights turn off and on, just things like that. That was constant. And my husband was not used to anything like that. I was, because I'd been introduced to it as a kid. You don't walk
Hmm.
through the occult without getting some baggage, some spiritual
Hmm.
baggage.
Hmm.
And so I had that stuff with me all the time. I just didn't know what to do with it. I was never taught how to handle that. I was never taught spiritual warfare. So I just ignored it. I just tried to pretend like, oh, it's not happening, it's not real. And so by the time I was in my late 30s, my son had messaged me and said, Mom, I think that you need to listen to this minister. I said, okay. So I listened to this message, and about 5 minutes in, he started talking about how that even as Christians, we can open doors to the demonic. We can have them attached to our flesh, our mind, our will, our emotions, and need to have them cast out in the name of Jesus, like commanding them to go. And I thought, you know what? I think I need that. I think that's part of what's going on with me. I had no idea what part was physical. I had no idea what part was spiritual. I had no idea what part was mental. I had diagnosis of post traumatic stress disorder, clinical depression, and DID, dissociative identity disorder, meaning that I thought I had alters. The idea behind that diagnosis is that as a child, if you go through, especially as a child, if you go through trauma, that you can split into different personalities. So
Hmm.
I thought I had like these alters living in me. I talked to them, they talked to me. I knew their names, I knew their personalities. They all hated my husband, they all hated my family.
Oh wow.
It was very, very difficult. So I had voices constantly. If I was
Hmm.
awake, I had
Hmm.
voices
Hmm.
going in my head. It was never quiet, it was never just me. And so, going into learning about spiritual warfare, I was like, because I loved God and I had been in church that whole time, but I had never been taught anything about spiritual warfare.
Were
I
some of
knew
those,
there were
not
demons.
breaking you? Were some of those voices telling you to behave the way you were behaving with your
Yes.
husband? Okay. Okay.
They would say things
Because first
like,
of all, they're telling you you're believing or you're hearing that they don't like your husband.
yeah. He's out to get you. He just wants to hurt you. He's emotionally damaging to you. He's mean to you. Look how he looks at you. He don't treat you right. He don't love you right. All he wants is this from you, or all he wants is that. He should understand. They would say the same things about my son. Look, your son
Wow.
is victimized. They wouldn't say victimized, but they would say he's being mean to you. He's treating you just like his dad treated you.
Mm.
He's being evil to you. And like with my mom and stepdad, all they want is stuff from you. They don't love you. They love your brother. He'll always be first in their life. You'll never be first to them. They don't love you like they love him. My church, it would be, oh, they just think they're better than you. You don't fit in. You're not one of them. If they really seen you, they would know that you're not one of them. And then it would be
Wow.
just kill yourself. If you just died, life would be so much easier. Your family would be better off. Look, you're a burden to everybody. You burden
Wow.
everybody in your life. If you would just die, you could be at peace and rest with Jesus, and they could go on with their lives and they would be better. Constant. Like I'm not like if you're sitting in your home and you have your radio on, that's what it
Hmm.
was like.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
it was never silent.
Wow.
When I was going to college, I would have to turn the TV on just to drown out the noises so that I could study. My mom would always say, and I never told anybody about this. Nobody in my life knew any of this. I hid it. I was taught from 7 years old, you hide everything. If it
Wow.
doesn't fit the mold of being pretty, good,
Hmm.
perfect, you hide
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
People knew I had PTSD and people knew I had depression. Nobody knew I had DID except my husband, and he only knew a smidgen of how bad it was. But there were nights I would go to sleep with a knife under my pillow and he would sleep with one eye open. There were nights that he would wake up and I would be hiding in the closet because I couldn't sleep in our bed, or I would be hidden under our bed. There were nights I would be in the bathroom rocking and crying for mommy. Will mommy come get me? It was intense
What
years.
what did your husband understand from that in order to be able to relate to you? What did he come to a conclusion that you are a torn, broken, damaged woman, and did he feel like he was holding on to the relationship because he has a responsibility to help to see you through this moment? Was he optimistic that okay, she's been damaged, and maybe God sent me here to hang in there despite or mood changes and all the threats and the dangers. I keep my eye open. I don't want to leave her because I think I'm here to help her. How did he rationalize staying in a relationship that was threatening?
We've talked about that. On the other side, once I went through healing and was completely healed and everything, we've talked about why he stayed, because I never could understand why he stayed. I would ask him, why do you stay? Why won't you
Hmm.
just leave? Like I
Hmm.
couldn't make him leave. I would try. I hated him, could not stand him, because everything in me was, I don't want to negate my responsibility. I was allowing the voices to dictate my emotions, is a better way to say it. Um, but whenever I walked through everything and I'm on the other side of it, we really talked about that. And he never left because he was afraid I would kill myself. He always felt
Hmm.
like that if he left, I wouldn't have the stability and someone to take care of me, because he became my caregiver. The last 15 years of our marriage was basically him being my caregiver. And he thought that without him there that I would just kill myself, because there were times that I would have to have him hide the weapons in the house. I would have to be like, he was my accountability partner so that I wouldn't kill
Wow.
myself. So he knew that I was on the brink of suicide a lot.
So God
And
sent you an angel,
yeah, I mean, well, and
a
two,
guard, a guarding angel.
the thing that God did too, the one reason that I would never kill myself is because of my son. From the time that my son was born, I would always hear, what would he do if you kill yourself? What would
Hmm.
happen to him? He suffered so much loss in his life.
Hmm.
Don't do that to him. And so that became, there were times that I don't want to say I was close, because I would always hear that and I would always say, I can't do that to him. But there were times it was hard to not. It was harder to live than it was to die a lot of days. And it would have been so much easier to have just given in and taken my life, because it was very difficult. The depression was so severe that it was physically painful. And
Wow.
unless you've been there, I don't know how else to describe it. It's like you're hovering over a black pit that has no bottom, and you're about to fall into it, and you're only gripping on the side with your nails, and that at any moment you could fall all the way in, and if you fall in, you're not getting back out. I was on the brink of that for years. And I can remember sitting on the side of my bed because I was slipping into insanity.
Mm.
And I can remember saying, your name is Nichole. Your son is, your parents are, because I was getting to the point where I wasn't sure that if I would wake up me. And I would pray, God, please just let me wake up me. Please don't let me lose myself. Please don't let me just be gone. Because the voices would always say, just let us have the driver's seat. You take a break. We'll let
Mm.
you rest. Just slip
Wow.
back and let us take over.
Wow.
And I would never let them take fully over, ever. There was
Wow.
something in me that said, don't do that. Don't give them permission. Don't give in. And that was a constant battle, because how wonderful does that sound to just be able to take a break and let them take over. And I would I would disassociate sometimes, where I would just blank out. I would just be gone. And there were times that I would sleep for hours and hours and hours just trying to escape life. Sleeping was a very big escape for me. I would try to just go to sleep because everything hurt. My body hurt. My mind hurt. I was so painful that people couldn't even hug me. To touch my skin just like this hurt like someone had punched me. I was back and forth to the Mayo Clinic getting different diagnoses on more and more medication. That's where I was when I heard that sermon. After I heard that sermon, I said, I'm reaching out to that pastor. And I did. And I asked him, did he have any resources that I could learn more? And he gave me a list of books. And then I lost a year. I got the books, I set them aside, and I lost a year. I don't really know exactly what all I was doing that year. I do know I met for a while with a friend of mine, and we prayed through a lot of different things. I prayed through really trusting God, because in that prayer time, God said, you don't trust me. And I said, what? What do you mean I don't trust you? Me? Don't trust you? And he gave me a vision. And what I saw was me in the driver's seat. And I immediately thought, oh, that means I have him in the passenger seat. I get that. And then I
Mm.
look over and he's standing outside. He's not even in the car. And I got the windows up and the doors locked. And he showed
Wow.
me that that's how locked out of my life I'd had him, because I didn't trust him because of the abuse. And I knew that the voices would always tell me, how can you trust a God that let that happen to you? He's not a good father. You read in the Bible, he's a good father. He's not a good father. Does a good father let that stuff happen to their kids? And I would hear that over and over. And I couldn't explain that. People would ask me, why do things like that happen to people? And, I had all the answers that we as Christians that have, well, we live in a fallen world. We live with people with free will, which those things are true, but it never sat in my spirit as comfort. It never sat as peace. And so we worked through a lot of that. But I physically got sicker and sicker. Every time I would try to meet with her for prayer, I would physically get sicker. I would about pass out. I would get dizzy.
Mm.
Um, and I just couldn't
The,
continue
the devil
being.
doesn't want that to happen. So
No,
he's, yeah.
no.
Hmm.
And so I stopped going. And then I lost a year. A year went by. And that would bring us into May of 2020. We were living in Arizona at the time. We had moved to Arizona. And the Lord laid on my heart to set aside a week for prayer and fasting. At this point in my life, I honestly didn't know if I was going to make it through the night. Like every night when I would go to sleep, I was having breathing issues. I thought my life, and I was like 275 pounds plus. I was very, very overweight, very just sick physically.
Wow.
And the Lord laid on my heart to set aside a week for prayer and fasting for healing. I said, okay, Lord, I can do that. And then he said, make it public. And I'm like, but Lord, nobody cares. Nobody's going to want to hear. Nobody's going to want to pray with me. Why do I got to do that? But I did. I put it on Facebook. I made it public. And the outpouring of love that I received, I just could hardly believe it. People from all over the world were reaching out to me. People sent cards. People sent prayers. People sent verses. People sent words that God had given them. And I knew, looking back, that was God pouring out his love through his
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
And then he said, call your parents and have them come over and pray for you. And I said, but Lord, they live 2 hours away, because the voices would say, you're not worth that. You can't have your parents drive 2 hours. How are you going to ask them to do that? And I said, Lord, if you really want them to come over, if that's really you and that's really your will you please tell them? And then my mom called me not long later, and she said, Nichole, I feel like the Lord is saying we need to come over and pray for you. I said, okay, I think so too.
Wow.
So
Wow.
we set a day for that week, and they came over.
So now you know the Lord really loves you.
Yeah. Yeah. He sent my parents. He gives them a message. Before they came over, he really started leading me through deep, deep repentance.
Mm.
And for the first time, I was able to admit that I had turned into an abuser. I was emotionally abusing people. I had turned into the thing that I did not like the most. And he also walked me through, this one was really hard. He said, you've not honored your father, meaning my biological dad.
Whoa. Wow.
That's what I said. When he said that, the look on my
Really?
face, that's
Really,
about what
God?
I
Are you
said.
really serious on this one?
Yeah.
Wow. What?
That's what I said. And I was mad. I was angry at first. And he was deceased at this time. My biological dad had already.
Oh, okay, okay. Was that from age, illness, or what?
He was a heavy, heavy smoker, and he died from COPD, something with
Okay,
his
okay,
lungs.
okay, okay.
He was, I think, only in his 60s. So like
I was,
early
I was,
60s.
I was young.
Yeah. He had really, really bad lungs from that. Like, he smoked 2 or 3 packs a day. He was heavy,
Whoa.
heavy. Like one right after the next, like chain smoker.
Jeez.
So when the Lord said that to me, at first I was mad, but I was at the point in my life where I was ready to do anything to get free. I was so sick. And I said, okay, Lord, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? Are
Because
you saying I would have?
now he's gone. I can't have a conversation with him. So how do I make amends now?
Absolutely. And he said, you dishonored him by the way you talk about him. You call him names, you make fun of him, you laugh at him, and you look at him like he's a waste of space. You never once looked at him like he was my creation, who I wanted to save. And I honestly did not care if he went to heaven or hell. I didn't necessarily want him to go to hell. It's not that I wanted him there. I wasn't wishing him there, none of those things. But I didn't care. I didn't care at that point in my life. And I was the first one to jump in family conversations to talk bad about him. I was the first one to make fun of him, not to his face, of course, ever, never, none of that, but behind his back with my family. I was the first one to say how bad he was, how awful he was. I did not see any redeeming qualities at all in him. I never once looked at him as someone that God wanted to save.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the Lord walked me through that, I knew, like, that was sin. That was wrong. I had a wrong attitude. I had a wrong heart. I should have been praying for him more than anybody. And so I repented for that. And then I also asked the Lord, would I have had to have had a relationship with him? And he said, no, it wasn't about relationship. It was about your heart issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so that in that moment, I knew I was able to finally fully forgive him, because that was the last thing that I needed to release in order to walk in full forgiveness. And I did say at that point, I do honor him. I honor him as my biological father. I honor him as a creation of God that God would have wanted to redeem in those things. The other big major, well, he walked me through a lot that week, but another major thing he walked me through was releasing the need to understand why the abuse happened. So prior to that, my whole life, I always wanted to know why. I would ask God, if I could just know why, then I could heal. Like, in my, hear me telling God, this is how I can heal, God. That doesn't work. But in my mind, I thought I needed that answer. I need to know why.
Right.
And the Lord showed me that I was at a crossroads, and I could continue down the same path I've been on my whole life, or I could release that questioning and choose to walk by faith and walk down the path of healing. And I knew by releasing it what that meant. That meant I would never bring it up again. I would never ask again. I would never question again. And inside, I would never question again. I would truly say, I'm going to look at you through the lens of your word, not the lens of my experience, because I've been doing it backwards. I've been looking at him through the lens of my experience versus the lens of his word. And I will walk by faith. And so he walked me through that. And that was a major release, major. Like healing came with that even before we went into prayer, because that was huge in my life. That was a huge wall that was between God and I. And then my parents came. And when they came, we prayed for about 4.5 hours. And in that 4.5 hours, my
Wow.
stepdad cast about 45 to 60 demons out of my body, made them release my mind, my will, my emotions, and my flesh. And every single
Wow.
one of the altars was actually demons that had been speaking to me for all those years.
Wow.
All of that left. After it left, we kind of just sat on the couch staring at each other like, did that just happen? Because we was not brought up around this stuff. We were in church and we loved God, but we were not brought up around spiritual warfare and those types of things. And we're like, did that just happen? Like, what just happened? But from that moment, I've had zero symptoms of mental illness, not one. Completely, totally, the mental illness is gone. There were still some healing that God walked me through. That's been an ongoing process. But I don't have any, I would say I don't have any effects at all left of the abuse. I'm free, I'm healed, I'm whole. That's why I can talk about it. I would have never been able to talk about it before. I would have never even been able to tell my story like this before. I've been telling my story now since 2020. I started in ministry helping other people, started writing some books because God said, I set you free, now go help others. I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm in it. What we going to do? And so that's kind of
Wow.
where I'm at.
Now, that is incredible, incredible. I don't know. I don't know. I am in awe just to listen to your story, but it shows us um how amazing God is. And I don't know, again, it comes back to one statement that I've made to so many of my guests by listening to their stories, and it just popped into my mind now because I never have it planned to say, but there's a moment when it pops into my mind. And this statement that God deposited into my spirit a couple years ago, to say to some of my guests, depending on their story, one of these days, God will unveil to you the mystery of your history. He
Yeah.
will unveil to you the mystery of your history. He'll unveil to you why you've been through all that you have been through, and why He kept you through them, and the purpose behind that. Now, to me, to the mortal finite mind, I cannot grasp. I cannot grasp how a young girl been through all that you've been through, and and still live to this age, to look back and to talk about it. I don't even know, and I'm sure there are others who have been through similar and worse who survived, but from my perspective, I can't even grasp how you lived through it, let alone get to where you are now. But that is an incredible story. That is an incredible story. Now the question, and I know you're running out of time now because we have limited time for the day. Maybe one of these days you'll come back and talk about the good side of Nichole's ministry, the impact of your ministry, how you have seen God use your story to change some people's lives. I'm sure there has to be some of that, and maybe by the time you come back, there is going to be something that's the Lord going to accomplish through that. One of the questions that I want to ask you now, as we are coming down to your limited time, how has your husband dealt with now a complete, revolutionized, transformed Nichole? What's the story now with you and your husband, since 2020, sitting down and talking about? Is he saying now, this is the reason why I wasn't leaving you? Did he foresee something, envision something, or did he say, you know what? I never see this coming, but now I know why? What's the conversation been between you and him on the relationship standpoint and the transformation? I'm bungling up all here, but how have you guys been able to reflect on that, laugh on that, cry on that, and say, look where we are?
He was not home when we prayed that day. He had to work. Back in
I
those
I don't
days, he
mean
was.
I don't mean being home. I'm being experiencing the change, Nichole.
Oh, this was how quick it was, though. This was how dramatic the change was. When he came home from work that day, in that moment, one of the first thing I couldn't even talk. I was so emotional, and I apologized as soon as he came home. I repented and told him that it was so important for me to tell him how sorry I was for every name I'd ever called him, for allowing the enemy to use me as a weapon to hurt him. And
Wow.
I also verbally submitted to him because prior to that, prior to May 2020, if you said the word submission to me, my eyes would have automatically rolled and I would have said, don't talk to me about that nasty stuff. That was like a 4 letter ugly word to me. I don't want to hear it. So from that moment on, I have completely changed. It's like I tell everybody that old Nichole, she's dead. And he noticed it immediately. Like you could not know me and not notice it immediately. So he
Mhm.
went through the same process that I went through. We did prayer with him. He got free from some bondage that he had been in bondage to for years and years and years. That's when we started having the conversations about why did you stay? How did you stay? And he started telling me about that he stayed because of afraid that I was going to commit suicide. And it's like we've been newlyweds. We are learning each other, who we really were meant to be from the beginning, because I feel like I'm finally starting to walk in the identity that God had given me and not the identity of demons. And I'm
Mhm.
very open with him. We have very open discussions. We talk together, we pray together. We actually do life together now. We are life partners, and he's not just my caregiver. And I, the ministry aspect has just astounded him. He's a very he's more quiet. I'm the outspoken one. He's very quiet. God's gonna work on him in that though. There'll be a day where he's not so quiet. But
Mhm.
it's just been an amazing thing, the transformation that we both have had, and I that it's really hard to put into words. Um, did I answer your question?
Well, I mean, I know, I said so much. I said so much in my rambling on that. But yes, yes, you came home and your apology and the new you that this is unlike Nichole. I'm sure it may have shocked his system, but as you say, it it was um he could not see
Mhm.
the change in you, in attitude, communication, how you respond, how you communicate to him. I'm just curious now to see. Well, you say you both now are is not that you're caretaker now. You're both in doing ministry. He's still on the layback side, but you're open that change will come when he get on the more extrovert side, and and start to open up himself. What has the relationship been now in terms of how you communicate? How relaxed you are now.
Mhm.
Nobody's sleeping with one eye open. Nobody's sleeping with a knife under the pillow. The threat is gone. What has it been like now? Now there is now real life as opposed to just this tension, fearful. What's the other word I want to use? Mistrust kind of
Mhm.
thing in the relationship. How is it going now?
We both are much more open with how we feel and what we think. Like I used to could care less what he thought or how he felt. As long as he was doing what I wanted, I didn't care what was behind it. And so I'm much more asking him, how do you feel? What do you think about that? What are your thoughts? What do you feel like God's saying to you? And helping him to just be able to relax and be him, because this is how bad it literally was. I can remember he would used to sit on the couch, we would sit side by side, and I would see him look at me out the corner of his eye to see if I was getting angry at him, because his breathing made me angry. Like his literal
Wow.
breathing would get on my nerves, and I would yell at him, "Why are you so stupid? Can you not even breathe right?" Like that's how I talked to him before. My daily conversations with him was, "You're stupid, you don't do anything right. Why are you so dumb? Why can't you do anything right?" And I don't talk to him like that anymore. And I don't look at him like that anymore. He's not dumb. He's none of those things. And so he's been able to relax and come out of his shell and be who God has created him
Mhm,
to be
mhm,
without me
mhm,
there beating him down
mhm,
24/7. I'm his cheerleader now. I used to be his worst critic. Now I listen to his ideas. I listen to what he thinks. I get behind his ideas. Used to be if he had an idea, that's so dumb. Why would you think of that? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Now it's like,
wow.
okay, let's see how we can make that happen. Let's talk about it. Let's see. Let's see how that works. You're smart, you're intelligent. I'm proud of you. I would have never said those things before. I would have never once told him that I'm proud of him. And now those are the things that I say to him. And I see him feeling more comfortable in his own skin and feeling like, I can do something in life. I can be something. And I'm not saying it's because of me. It's not because, but
Mhm,
getting that
mhm.
negativity out has been life changing for him.
I'm just imagining that you both now start to feel the sense of value in life, and I'm just thinking, with all of the tension and the forces that is gone, that are gone out of your lives, you must have added a few more years on your lives. So it's just
Yeah.
me thinking, you maybe just add a few more years on your life. My friend, I've been talking to Nichole Henson, and this is one of the another of the amazing stories that I have listened to, and I'm hoping that she will promise to come back another time to continue on the story, and maybe I could get her husband to join her somewhere down the road and decide, say, tell me the story between you both, because this has been a fascinating story. How did you deal? Give me your side of the story. Maybe you can have a conversation where I say, maybe we could both talk with the dark on the good side of life, because there is something to celebrate. I know you have to go, because of your time, but what would you say in your final words to somebody, a young child, a parent who's dealing with the child who's been traumatized, or a child who's going through some of what you've been through, or a relationship that has been through some of what you've been? What would be a summarized thought that you would share with somebody on this?
My biggest takeaway would be don't give up on God. Don't blame God. Don't give up on God. He is the healer and He is the chain breaker. In my life, had I surrendered fully to Him, I would not have walked through all of the years of running from Him that I did. So, my best advice would be surrender fully to God, every area, and learn about spiritual warfare. Because if you have been through any trauma and you have a child who's been through trauma, I promise you there is spiritual warfare connected to that trauma. Learn to operate in the authority that Jesus Christ has given you. Walk in it, learn it, let it be part of your identity, but don't give up on God. I think so many times when we go through trauma, we say, well, God doesn't care, God doesn't love us. That's a lie straight from the pits of hell. Break identity with that lie, break that lie off your life, and walk in the truth of who God is. He is your Father and He loves you.
It's one of the most, other than the traumatic side of thing, one of the most high point, uh of the story, of the conversation, is the dramatic way how God proved to you that He really, really, really loves you and is actually looking out for you. Because when He said, "Oh, you need to have your parents pray for you," and you say, "My parents are 2 hours away. God, are you really serious? Do you really want me to invite them to come here to drive 2 hours to pray with me?" And just after you had the conversation with the Lord, then out of the blue, and what I remember from that, and I know where time is going, what I remember from that is that when the Lord was sending Cornelius, telling Cornelius to send to Joppa to call for Simon Peter in the house of Simon Atana, while He's telling Cornelius to send there to get Peter, He's also speaking to Peter, rise Peter, kill and eat. Right. So the Lord's been communicating with you that your parents need to come and pray for you. And then you're saying to your mom, you need to go pray for your daughter. And before you know it, your mom called and said, we need to pray for you. We need to come over there. That must be the one of the highest haha moment that one can imagine. That, God, thank you that you took it out of my hand. I didn't have to go to the stress of trying to impress or persuade them to come here. You did it for me, that they're offering to come. And to your delight, Look what the Lord did. Praying for 4.5 hours. My good Lord, that is a half a day's work of praying to get out all those forces that were just destroying your life. That must have been one of the best part of your experience.
It was amazing because the effects were immediate. Like we knew immediately I was different and my life was never going to be the same.
Before your husband came home from work, Nichole was chained.
Yeah.
That is an incredible experience of the immediate working of God. My friends, God still work miracles no matter what the devil say, no matter how you feel, God still work miracles. And this is a testimony of the miracle work. I want to thank you for joining me in this story with Nichole. I am fascinated by listening to her story, and I'm sure that you are. And hey, it's a good story to share with friends and family because you never know what it will do to help somebody to put their own experience into perspective and to experience change like she has done. I hope that you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Facebook and Twitter. And by the way, if you do TikTok, check out ORB Ministries. We are there. And finally, if you have a story that you like to share, don't be afraid to email me at orbministries@gmail.com. I'd be more than happy to give you an opportunity to share your story because stories are powerful, inspirational, and they give life and hope to others. Until next time, I hope that I'll see you again on another Let's Talk with the Doc. Nichole, you're going to stay right there. We'll just say goodbye when we get off here, just like we came on. I'll see you again next week, my friend, on another Let's Talk with the Doc. Well, thank you for checking in on ORB Ministries. I trust that you will share with your friends, subscribe, hit the bell for notification, and stay tuned because you never know what's next or who will join the conversation.